since I don't have a, let's get all the
You
audio.
can't see that house, could you?
No, you
Good.
could just right.
I'm gonna have to get it back in a minute, but
Great.
Floor's yours.
Are we ready to go?
Ready to go.
Great. So should I'm not gonna break the fourth wall, or I probably should, and then look to you,
Yeah.
like this. Here with me is Dr. Gil Singletary, author of Crossroads, an American Case Study. Choose Your Path. Dr. Singletary, welcome.
thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on today. So if I may, let's get started. The reviews have been wonderful. And the first question I always ask, with a book is, where did you get the inspiration? This is definitely not your typical book.
Well, Crossroads has been a labor of love. When I first started writing Crossroads, it was an autobiography about myself. 6 months into writing the book, I realized that it was much bigger than I was. I realized that there were others out there who had similar stories that I had, and I had to make changes to text. I don't know. I'm totally lost.
So I wanted to sort of chronicle my life.
Yeah.
But just how about you start where it was an autobiography about myself. 6
Yeah,
months
you
in.
want to start that over. As long as when you're doing that long speech, if
Yeah.
you mess up any, you got to start back over because it's gonna be kind of hard for me to cut while you in the.
So yeah, here's your line if you just want to reacquaint yourself.
Oh, this is going terrible.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to make that when you flowing like this. It's hard to make that cut
Sure.
because you don't have that natural, like your voice comes down,
Right.
just like you're.
Oh yeah, you just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So just start from the top, you think?
Yeah.
All right.
You want to start over?
Yeah, we
Alright.
could. I could even restart my line if you want.
But I think we ought to be okay with you because with you talking, and then when G, I can cut the G kind of, because you was okay,
Yeah.
and then let me see, let me think.
Yeah. Well, I got
You know what? Just start it all over. It's better second sorry. If you're willing to do it, just
Yeah,
let me do it.
totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I do this 1,000 times a day. That's what it takes.
Okay.
And just keep talking. They'll never know
Yeah.
what was supposed
I'm
to be
gonna
on
walk
the
in
page.
here just so when I'm gonna post that and I know what Steve means. That's where we start.
Yeah, you just wave your hand.
Whenever you are ready.
Here with me is Dr. Gil Singletary, author of Crossroads, an American Case Study. Choose Your Path. Dr. Singletary, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's definitely a pleasure to be talking to you. So if I may, let's get started. The reviews for your book have simply been terrific. And whenever I see a book like this, I always have to ask, where did you get the inspiration? This is definitely not your typical book.
Again, thank you for having me. Crossroads has been a labor of love. When I first started writing Crossroads, it was initially an autobiography about myself. 6 months into the book, that all changed. When I first started writing the book, I wanted to sort of chronicle my life in terms of all the trials and tribulations that I experienced as a kid. Growing up in poverty, government assistance, all the things that I experienced growing up as a youth. Again, 6 months into the book, that all changed. I realized that there were others that were out there who had experienced similar issues that I experienced, and at that point I knew I had to change the direction of the book.
Wow. Perfect. All right, so then here's to the next one. That looks good to you, right?
Yeah.
Great. Well, you have an impressive resume, PhD, MBA, JD. Looking at how far you've come from where you were first born and where you grew up, what do you think about all of that? How did it inform this book?
Again, the book is not just about me. It's much larger than I am. Again, when I first started writing the book, it was about me. It was about myself, my experiences, how I was able to overcome my obstacles. But again, 6 months into the book, that all changed. I realized that there were so many others who grew up with me in the projects that had experienced similar issues and had overcome great odds. So for example, what if I told you that the first black baby doll was created in the Glades? What if I told you that the first African American golfer to win multiple PGA tournaments was from the Glades?
That's incredible.
Right. So that's what the book is about. It's much larger than myself, and I realized that And I thought, how could I make this just about me when there are so many others out there whom have experienced the same things that I've experienced and has exceeded in terms of life in ways that I have in life as well. And so I thought that would be very selfish of me to sort of keep the book only about myself. Why not make the book about others as well?
Perfect. Three choices. Yeah, maybe you should have mentioned that, because I think that was my cue. So, yeah, so really, let's take a look. Maybe, so you have a lot of text there. How about
Yeah.
I ask a question that's like, so you expanded the scope of the book to not only take a look at your life, but the lives of those you grew up with. And the way you frame, the life decisions that you made and your friends made, is through the perspective of three separate paths. The book is all about paths. And these are success, death, and despair. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
1 second. Where are you getting that from?
Isn't it, so do you see how you talk about in life, today we have three choices from which?
Okay.
And then look, it pours onto the next page. Then you have like
Gotcha.
2 whole paragraphs. And then you talk about 10 examples for you to follow. It walks you through their life from infancy until where they are now.
Gotcha.
See?
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think this would be better
Yes.
to ask that question. So you would be sort of picking up. So the last thing you said was about, it's not just, it would be selfish to only talk about yourself and not everyone else.
Right.
So then, I guess you could just sort of pick up, so rather than just being about me, I wanted the book, that's exactly right. So rather than being just about me, I wanted the book to feature the rich stories of the Glades.
Mhm.
And then you would just talk, you would, it would be those next paragraphs until it says interviewer.
Right.
What do you think? Because this is probably where we want to introduce the 3 paths.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. See that front? I missed an important part right here. I talked about it's much bigger than me. One of the things I've discovered by the book is there are others out there from small town. In addition, what's more amazing are the multiple contributions that the Glades have made for the world that many people are not aware of. That segue, that was an important segue right there.
I'm just going to stop it. We can start.
All right, yeah, do that.
Just someone.
Great. And do we look good on camera? Is nothing sticking out? Pants are zipped up and stuff.
Yeah, you all good.
Great.
Ready?
Yes, sir. Go. Gil, you have an impressive resume. PhD, JD, MBAs. Looking at all that you've accomplished, and seeing where you grew up, and looking at all the circumstances you overcome, what do you think of all that, and how does it inform your book?
I do, but again, the book is much bigger than just myself. Again, 6 months into writing the book, I realized that this book was much larger than Gil Singletary. I realized that this book was about the Glades. This book was about the kids who I'm from, those whom are wondering if there is a life outside of the Glades. So for me, when I was writing the book, I wanted to chronicle my life history, and sort of provide a roadmap for kids, for youth, for parents, for others, any event that they don't have sort of that direction or that blueprint, if you will, in terms of how do you navigate the rough terrains of the projects. Again, for me, growing up, I didn't have any role models. I didn't grow up with doctors or lawyers or accountants. For me, the person that we all looked up to was, in some cases, were drug dealers, guys who have been to prison. And so I wanted to provide something for kids that they could have in terms of a roadmap, in terms of direction, that could help guide them throughout their paths. And so Crossroads, it provides 3 distinct paths for kids to follow. You have a path of success. Within this path, there are several really interesting in-depth interviews of very successful people that have come from the Glades, both Pahokee and Belle Glade. whom are very successful as NFL superstar athletes,
Wow.
artists. Many have been in big box store movies such as Drumline, Remember the Titans. Others who are doctors and lawyers. We have a guy, Willie Garrett, a famous lawyer, he recently passed. But again, famous lawyers, those who have contributed to the world. The Glades have contributed to the world in major ways. In many cases, the world is not aware of her contributions, and I wanted to make the world aware of the contributions of the Glades, while at the same time providing a roadmap or a blueprint, if you will, for the next generation, so they can follow.
Wow. And you speak about these contributions that the Glades have made, to the American society. And these span, and tell us a little bit more about it. These span from doll making to professional golf.
Right. And so what's unique about the Glades is what would you think if I told you that the first black African American baby doll with what they call anthropologic traits, or one might consider phenotypical traits, that very first construction of that doll was from the Glades.
Wow.
Right? And so you think about now with the advent of the Bratz dolls, and you have several other baby dolls that exist that have African American features. Again, when I tell you that this started in the Glades, in a small place, and let's remember, the Glades is a place with less than 40%, 40% unemployment,
Wow.
high crime rate, very little resources, and in view of Pahokee, only one stoplight. So if I tell you that a place like that can produce people such as those who created the first black baby doll, or Mel Tillis, the country singer, or Calvin Peete, the first African-American golfer to win several PGA tournaments.
It's amazing.
So if I tell you that the same place that created or that produced all of these wonderful people, if you will, is from a small town, less than 20,000 people combined, I think in any other context that would be considered amazing. And that's the Glades. And if I may say one more thing, we're talking about a place in Palm Beach County, one of the richest counties in America. Just 30 miles of Palm Beach.
Wow.
We have a place that is very desolate, with little resources, only known for its sugar cane. That's the place I'm talking about. That's the place that have provided great contributions to the world. A place that I'm very proud of. A place, in my opinion, is everywhere America.
And it really shows the resilience of the people of the Glades, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Damn, that was really good.
Right.
Yes, that sounds.
I gotta
that sounds
say-
amazing. I love some Demetrius.
Okay.
That was really good.
Little people with
Your favorite's gone.
Yeah, exactly. Off the dome. This is really good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if he teamed me up like that, we were good. You did a great job of teaming
Thank
up
you.
too, man.
Cool. So do you want me to ask? You have the 10 examples for you to follow. Some of this stuff, or
No, because I talked about that already.
yeah, you did. You
Yeah,
did.
in terms of success. And I might go back and revisit that again, too. Okay. So where are we now?
We're sort of here. Yeah, to me, this is one of the many fascinating things about
Okay.
this book. And then we transition to life. This kid with
Yes.
the life in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just go. We can just go with that, yeah. Yeah, let's do it.
Great.
Cool.
And so I should refer to you as Dr. Singletary, not Gil. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Dr. Singletary, I must say, that's one of the things I find most amazing about this book, is the way that you're able to paint a picture of the lives of so many people and really clearly define, these separate paths that people are able to take. And, oops, kind of forgot where I was going with that. Roadmap. Oh, okay. And so negative example. And you show all the success that the Glades has produced. Okay, ready, set, go. Dr. Singletary, I must say, to me, that's one of the most amazing parts of the book, the way you're able to paint this stark contrast between these separate paths that people are able to take, whether it's success, despair, or death. And you not only focus on the successes of the Glades, but also some points where people's lives have taken serious disaster. And one of the stories that sticks with me to this day, days, weeks after I read it, is the one of the young man who's now serving 2 consecutive life sentences for murder. And, really following his story, from the moment the murder happened to the moment, he was convicted, going back all the way to his birth and the effect it had on he and his mother. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Wow. That was a very emotional chapter. It was an emotional chapter to write as well. I had the opportunity to go to the prison to visit that young man. When he committed the murder, he was about 6 months into his 19th birthday. And so when I got a chance to visit him in prison, although time had passed, he was still pretty much a kid. And I would never forget the smile he had on his face when we first met. He was with his mother, actually came on a visit as well, and it was good because I also got a chance to talk to his mom and interview his mom. And I was able to see this tragedy from multiple perspectives, right? So I was able to see this tragedy from the eyes of a young 19-year-old kid, but also of a mother who was also suffering from her kid being taken away. Now, obviously he did a very bad thing, of course he did. But again, one of the things I wanted to do in the book is capture what does death look like in terms of the effect that it has on not only the person who's causing the crime, but those whom are surrounding that person as well. That chapter was very touching because when I looked at that kid, I was able to see myself. One of the things I write about in the book in terms of, and we've talked about the path of success, but I talk about, when I chronicle my life, how there were times where I could have easily taken the wrong turn. And in some cases, we all could take the wrong turn. And in many cases, it's because of the grace of God that we did not take the wrong turn. And when I look at him, he's one who, for whatever reason, it was meant for him to be where he is today. Again, not dismissing the gravity of what happened, but just understanding from just sort of a factual position or perspective, rather, that the events that surrounded his circumstance are very unique. And he's a great kid. He's a good kid who made a really bad decision. And we've all made bad decisions in our lives. And one of the things that he wanted me to let the world know is that he's very remorseful, and that if he could go back and change the events of that morning, then he would. But that chapter, The Path of Despair, is very riveting. It's about not only the life of a convicted murderer. Again, in that chapter, I tell his story backwards, so it's called Life in Red Rum. But it's also about another former NFL athlete who fell from grace as well. In addition to others that I won't discuss now because I'll hold that for you to read the book later.
For sure.
But it's an interesting path, and again, it's one of those paths where when you don't make the right decisions in your life, when you don't make the right choices, this path talks about the outcome. And if you follow the lives of several men in this particular path, you will find yourself moved beyond measures, beyond just this young man who's going to spend 2 life sentences in prison. How do you spend 2 life sentences in prison?
I don't know.
It's interesting to sit in his shoes. When you read his chapter, I take you so close that you could almost feel him. You can smell the linens that he's wearing. And you will walk away with a deep understanding of what life is and what life is not. This is a young man who didn't appreciate life until life was given to him. And that's what you will find in that chapter. Many of men who didn't appreciate life, but one who had to have life given to him before he could appreciate it.
And what exactly do you mean by life given to him?
He was given 2 life sentences.
Oh, now I see. That makes sense.
It's the paradox that I write about in the book. that it's sort of paradoxical. That again, a person who did not value life didn't value it until it was given to him. And now he values life. He has a different perspective of life. You know, life has a way of being very deceptive. With rap music, television, we glamorize what life is, living on the edge, or
Certainly.
you hear young guys talk about being thugs or being about that life as they call it. I got a chance to see what that was really like. And I think if many young men were able to see, and women for that matter, were able to see what that life is really about, I'm pretty convinced that many of them will change their path or the path that they're traveling. And when you read this particular path, you'll be moved.
Good. All right, let's look at the next question. So you talk about, wow, it's a very emotional. Should I ask you about the mother's feelings?
Yeah, come bring that back.
You sort of already touched on it, didn't you?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit. I don't think there's much else to say about that. I'll somehow, if you can, where do we go now?
Let's see what the next one is. I would say we're pretty much done with the first 2 pages. What do you?
Yeah,
How about, this is the one about the prominent people? But you already did that in your opening, didn't you?
yeah, we can go back and do that one again. And we can, to go back onto that success again, yeah.
It's not a bad idea just to have more material.
Yeah, and we can always cut it out.
Exactly.
And
And that'll make us looser knowing not everything we do actually hits tape.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's pick back up. So you should say something like, Dr. Singletary, before we go to the next question, you said something about his mother in court.
Mm-hmm.
You said something about his mother. I never thought of it. I never thought about the victim. I never thought about
Mother's perspective.
Looking at the collateral damage.
yeah, looking at collateral damage. Yeah,
Yeah.
from the mother's perspective. Yeah, because I want to talk about, because she told me, man, it's interesting, and I write about this in the book in great detail. So she's in court, looking at these bloody pictures of this man's dead body, sitting next to her son. And I talk about this from a psychological perspective, this feeling of distance that she has because she loves her son. She thinks he's passionate, loving,
Yeah.
but yet she's looking at the destruction he's
Right.
caused.
How you
Crazy.
done this?
How do you reconcile
You
that?
wasn't raised like this.
Yeah, how do you reconcile as a mother that? That's what she was struggling with. Because
Yeah.
as a mother, she feels the pain of another mother.
Right.
But then she's trying to protect her son. He's not being treated fairly in the court system as well.
No.
How do you?
But at the same time, you feel, well, maybe you should be treated like this.
Yeah, so she's struggling. She
It's
struggles with that.
Yeah.
I write about that in the text in depth. It's just a different perspective. Like, whoa.
It certainly isn't it?
Yeah, it's really crazy. So let's peek back on that just real quick, and then we'll jump to your next one. To me, that is fascinating things about the book. Never read that goes into current their life. The book is a lyric roadmap. I read his story and I was connected. I think, yeah. So then you can close that out for us.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you see what we're talking about?
It's probably on page before, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so you can close, let me see something here. Yeah, then you can close that out for us. And that makes it seem organic too, that you wanted to go back and say, yeah, so before we go to that next, to the next phase of the interview, or to the next question, I want to just go back, if I can, and ask you just questions about his mother.
Sure.
Can you talk about that? And I'll pick back up on that. And then you can close it out.
Yeah, to me,
Yeah.
that is one of the many fascinating things
Yeah.
about this book.
Yeah.
So just to kind of reiterate that.
Yeah, but you don't have to go do a lot of recapping. You don't have to do lots of more recapping.
Yeah.
Just hit some of those main things. Just wrap it up.
All right, cool. So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll transition to your mom, or to the mom
Yeah.
issue.
And
Great.
then you just wrap it up.
Great.
Yeah, and because then we're done with that.
Great.
Let me just make sure. Okay.
Y'all don't mind me. I'm just.
Okay, putting it on the Instagram.
Right, you never know when you need it.
Yeah.
Okay, that was growing up in the okay. Okay, where was, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Dr. Singletary, before we move on, you mentioned chronicling the perspective of the mother of the perpetrator and how difficult it was for her to reconcile her love for her son with the terrible deed he did. Can you speak a bit more about this?
Sure. I think that was one of the more interesting facets of the interview for me, even writing it in the book, was seeing this different dynamic because he has a loving mother. And so it was interesting because just imagine for a second, if you will, imagine sitting through several court proceedings. You love your child dearly, as anyone would. But at the same time, you're looking at a screen and you're seeing the sort of damage that your child has done to someone else. So it became an issue, I would presume rather, how do you reconcile dealing with the damage and the hurt? Because again, she's a mother, she has kids as well. So she's able to sympathize with the other mother while at the same time sort of negotiating her own feelings for her own son, particularly in this case because there was a lot of talk about how the trial proceedings did not occur. There were issues with the trial, just to say the least, right? And so how do you negotiate? How do you reconcile, rather, dealing with your own feelings for your child while at the same time you're sympathizing with the mother as well who has lost their child, during which you're looking at pictures and bloody pictures and you're hearing testimony from the prosecutor about how bad of a person your child is. Just imagine the highs and emotional lows that this mother must have experienced. And I wanted to capture that in the book. That wasn't lost on me. And I wanted to make sure the reader was able to see what life, again, in terms of life in Red Rum, what does it look like from multiple perspectives? I didn't tell the perspective of the victim, of course, but I wanted it to be known what life looks like from the perspective of a 19-year-old kid, but also sitting in prison right now. What does it look like through his eyes? I chronicle, as I said earlier, the entire trial, his emotions from a cognitive perspective. I literally walk you through the day-to-day events that proceeded from the time, from the time of the murder, all the way until his youth. Choices he made, decisions he made, things he did right and things he did wrong. And again, hopefully some kid who is at the veer of this crossroad or at the start of the path that he's traveling would read about his story and make a different choice for themselves.
And to me, that's one of the most fascinating things about the book is the way that you don't even solely focus, on the issue or on. I'll just repeat it or rephrase that. And to me, Dr. Singletary, that's one of the most fascinating things about this book is the way that you don't only hone in on the perspective of the person making the decisions, but all of the collateral damage that ensues because of the decisions they make.
Sure.
And because of this, you craft this beautiful roadmap that really shows people, how their lives can take one of three paths: success, despair, or death. And I think for that reason, the emotional impact of your work, the way this story is stuck with me, really makes me think that every young adult in America and every parent, of small children here in the U.S. should read your book.
Thank you. Again, life is very complex. Unfortunately, we don't get instructions with life.
We don't.
And some of us come from places where, like myself, there are no role models. And unfortunately, for some of us who were raised in very tough areas, we learn about life through our mistakes. Well, sometimes our mistakes are costly. Sometimes I'm sorry is never enough.
No.
Sometimes we can't go back and redo what has been done. I know from speaking with Corey, the 19-year-old that I write about. That if he can go back and do it again, I know he would.
Mhm.
But that's not life. That's not reality. That's not the world that we live in. So why don't we take his life example, and hopefully some other kid could learn from his mistake rather than having to make the same mistake.
And it is fitting that the chapter is titled Life, and you delve into all of its complexities. But in your book, you mentioned that it's not only life that's complex, but also death that's complex. And to me, one of the most impactful chapters of the entire work was the one focusing on death. And you looked at it in a really unique way. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Wow. That particular chapter is probably one of the most fascinating chapters. And again, of course, I wrote the book, so I'm going to say this. But it's a very fascinating chapter because I talk about death in a way that's different. In the U.S., for some whatever reasons, we don't talk about death or sex, right?
No.
We just don't talk about death or sex. It's one of those taboo areas that we don't talk about. It doesn't make good dinner table conversation.
Not at all.
And so I talk about death in terms of how does death look? Does it look different in the suburbs than it does in urban areas? Does it look different in Chicago opposing to Des Moines, Iowa? Does death look different in those places? And the answer in most cases is yes. And then you look at me like, well, how does death look different? Everyone dies. Well, of course everyone dies, but everyone don't die the same way.
Not at all.
So, for example, when I was writing the book, I was chronicling in this path of death, this section called the web of death, actually. There's a section in the path of death called the web of death. And I was writing about 10 guys that I knew growing up that were murdered. And all of their murders, well, there was one female as well, I'm sorry. So it was 9 guys and 1 female and who died, one from. All of their deaths are interconnected somehow. And I was writing about that, and I was reading this insert to my wife, and she said to me, do you really know these people that you're writing about, or are you making this up? And I looked at her, very perplexed, right? And I said, what do you mean am I making this up? And I said to her, this is nonfiction. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, do you really know 10 people that were murdered? And I looked at my wife and I said, no, I don't know 10 people that were murdered. I said, I can't count the number of people that I know that were murdered. And I knew that my wife knew that I was serious. And I said to my wife, I said, do you not know anyone who's ever been murdered? And she said, no. And I was puzzled by that. And so the next day I went and asked many of my colleagues, many of which have PhDs and JDs and they're doctors, lawyers. I even asked some janitors on my way. Do they know of anyone whom been murdered? Out of 10 people, maybe 2 people knew of someone indirectly, but no one knew of anyone directly. I was taken aback by that. And I thought, what does this mean? What does this, and not only what does this mean, but the psychology part of me was asking, what is the impact of me having so much knowledge in terms of knowing so many people that have died by means of murder, opposing to my wife and others, death comes by means of tragic accident or old age. What does this say about me that I know, that I have this form of reality? What does it say about my development? Because the first person that I known to be murdered, I think I was probably 10 years old.
That's young.
And friends of mine, we were wandering in a field one morning, and we actually found my niece's father. He had been murdered.
Wow.
And so my parents didn't know, but I ran back home and got in the bed, pretending like I didn't know what was going on. So by the time everyone figured out what happened, I walked outside for the first time like, yeah, it's so sad. Well, I was one of the 4 young kids who actually found my niece's father. He was shot and beaten to death, and he died in a field about 75 yards from our house. This is in projects, of course. And so this was at, again, age 10 or 12 for me, actually. That was the first time I've ever known someone in terms of being able to remember. Now, I'm sure there were others prior to that, but for some reason, this particular one stands out because I was able to witness him and his body in the first stages of decomposition. And so, but again, just to go back, I just asked myself, what does this mean to me? How does this impact me? And so I've been fascinated by death sort of ever since that. And I don't mean fascinated in terms of I want to go and see a dead body, of course, again, because I don't. But I wanted to know, how does death look, in terms of, from perspective, from the eyes of different people. And so in this chapter, in The Path of Death, I talk about how sometimes we don't always choose death. Sometimes death chooses us.
Certainly.
And depending on the choices that you make, the consequences and the paths that you take in your life, sometimes death may in fact come knocking at your door. And it happens more frequently, and of course in the urban areas than it does in the suburbs. So I write about it extensively in this chapter. How does death look in terms of the inner city compared to rural areas, the suburbs, by that I mean the suburbs, and what's the impact of that? And so again, I think it's interesting when you think about death in those regards.
I think a good question here, this isn't for the camera, like cross-cultural understanding, right? Like, your wife's perspective is different than your perspective. Right. And would you like in this interview to mention like,
yes.
how you would like, okay,
yes.
Then I can cue that question up, just like cross-cultural understanding.
Gotcha. Let me see this again.
Yeah, so well, let's see where we are on the screen.
Yeah, let me see, because there was a lot of good stuff I want to make sure I get in there.
Yeah. I mean, what about this 3 bestsellers in one?
Yes, you gotta mention that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I gotta go back to Plato's, I gotta get to that.
Oh, the Plato, Tupac.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can actually, that's gonna be you, that's you to introduce all that.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, and you do mention that. Yeah, okay, cool. So how about I just say, and I'll tell you what, the chapter you write on death, I mean, it is so remarkably well written. I mean, the scope of the allusions you make, going from Plato to Aristotle to Socrates to Tupac and Biggie,
right.
You're able to span, thousands of years of human history and really unite the understandings of people in our country from very disparate backgrounds.
Right, right.
Can you tell us a little bit about the way you wrote this chapter, how that's, sort of like an instrument of cross-cultural understanding?
Yes. I love what you just said.
All right, cool.
Okay, cool. Actually, I finished, yeah. So now you just got to team me up with Biggie and all that stuff that you just said,
and then you pretty much know what you're gonna say, I think.
I've already said it. Yeah. You're gonna introduce that because I've already said that part. That.
Well, then, do you remember? So it.
Yeah. So once you tee that part you just said.
Well, maybe you could say something like, this comes in like a really important time for our country.
Yeah. I'll just come up with something just fine. Yeah, because I love what you just said. Yeah, and then we'll pick back up right here.
The one section.
No, you've already talked about it.
Yeah,
that's what you got to tee up right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So here, let me go to that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're doing a terrific job, by the way.
Cool.
Yeah, great. You know what, so it looks like this and this are really the same.
Yes, yeah, I was just going to make the same comment. So we just combine those two together.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So here, let me do that a little bit.
Yeah.
Go a little further.
Cool.
Man, you're killing it.
Well, I
This is
appreciate
very
it.
good.
I'm glad I got this.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job. I love this next. You got to roll out this next question, by the way.
Thanks. Well, I just read this enough, so I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking where you're putting me down a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
We're definitely gelling there.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Let me think. Really web adapt. It's so well written. Plato Socrates. We're able to span the scope. It's a great read. How am I gonna frame this question? Will I just ask the cross-cultural question, or do you want me to just say anything else you want to? That seems premature a little bit. Right now.
Yeah. Take it out. Yeah.
So then just
Hold
do
it.
exactly what I
Yeah.
just said.
Yes.
All right.
Should I be looking at him or I'm looking at the camera?
No, definitely look at him.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I've been doing.
You only ever look at the camera if you're addressing people.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay,
to
that's
our
what
viewers at home. Yeah.
That's what I've been doing. Cool.
Exactly. So good job. I won't say much, but that's absolutely a beautifully written chapter.
Thank you.
The way you're able to so gracefully span thousands of years of human history, connecting the great thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, so the way you put it, modern day philosophers like Tupac and Biggie, the way you're able to unite their body of thought, to really bridge a gap of understanding that exists between the suburbs and rural areas, between white and black. That's profound. The way you speak about death, the way you anthropomorphize it, is a way that I, as a white male from a socioeconomically privileged background, never ever thought about death. Can you tell us a little bit about the way you wrote this book to truly bridge a gap in understanding between different parts of our country at such a pivotal point in our country's history?
That's a really good question. One of the things while writing The Path of Death that I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of tilt or a nod to history. And when we think about history, we cannot think about history in terms of now, right? In terms of the last century, right? One of the things I wanted to do is go back and do a little research. As a researcher, I wanted to go back as far as I could. So when I started to look at guys like Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, what does these guys think about death? Shakespeare, what does these guys think about death? Then I thought, well, what do current sort of philosophers, if you will, think about death? And who talks about death more now? And in this exploration, I thought, in terms of the latter, I thought, music. I hear death in music. And so I thought, well, let me tune in on this thought that I was having. And I was actually driving my car, and Tupac came on. And his song, I Hear Death Around the Corner, came on. I'm an old school rap kind of guy, and so when I heard the song, I thought, man, I haven't heard this in a while, but now I'm in a different sort of frame of mind in terms of the lyrics and relevancy of the lyrics. So I went back and I thought, let me Google the lyrics of this song. And I was literally blown away. And so from that point on, I was on this sort of thirst to find out, well, what are some other things that Tupac is saying about death? Because again, we have these great thinkers of the past in terms of Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, even Shakespeare, who've written beautifully about death, to try and explain this phenomenon, right? It's either fear. Either we fear death or we welcome death. And I thought it was interesting, not to drift too far away, but I thought it was interesting. I was watching the news, and they were talking about terrorists who were, they were saying that they couldn't find enough terrorists to go and commit, they couldn't find enough targets, rather, because there were so many terrorists to commit acts of kamikaze acts, right? That there were not enough targets. There were so many terrorists who wanted to commit these kamikaze acts that they didn't even have enough targets. And I thought, do these people fear death? And I thought, well, in Western culture, we have a fear of death, but everyone don't have that same fear of death. And so I went back again, thinking about Shakespeare, thinking about Tupac. What do these great thinkers think about death in terms of these modern day thinkers, in terms of Tupac and Biggie? And if you're questioning, well, why would I consider these guys as philosophers or modern day thinkers? Well, I would say to you, how do we define philosophers, or how do we define those who are influential, right? We sort of measure them by their following.
Absolutely.
Well, who have a greater following, right, than these guys, right? Tupac and Biggie.
Hardly anyone.
huge followings, right? They've been dead for years, and their following has increased since they've died. But anyway, back to their music. So I was listening to Tupac's song,
Hail Mary.
Hail Mary, which is another, yeah. And it's fascinating. The lyrics are fascinating. And so I started to play around with the lyrics, and I started to literally and what I did was interesting. I got Tupac's lyrics, and I put them on paper, and I got some of Aristotle's text, and I put them on paper. And I asked someone, I said, what would you do first I said, who do you think wrote these words? And they said, well, I don't know. And I changed some of the verbiage in Tupac's, so it wouldn't seem contemporary, right? So I did a little translation. And everyone that I showed that sort of script to said, oh, this must come out of the 1700s or 1800s, literally. And I said, what if I told you that Tupac said this? And they were blown away. Then I said to them, what if I told you that Biggie had a song called You're Nobody Until Somebody Kills You? And they said, well, it sounds very profound. And these are my friends who are PhD philosophers and quote unquote great thinkers, as they would want to identify themselves, right? And I said, what does that mean? You're nobody until somebody kills you. And so they started to pontificate, and we went on for a couple of minutes. And I said, you know what you just said is exactly what he said. Right? You consider yourself a great thinker. So again, I wanted to introduce the world to a different voice about death. Right? And I wanted to blend that as well, so you can appreciate, not to juxtapose Tupac, Biggie with Aristotle and Plato, but I wanted you to be able to appreciate the genius of all of these great thinkers.
Absolutely.
And that was the drive.